Hi, everyone, and welcome to our third monthly professional development webinar. Today, we're going to be talking about research experiences for undergrads. Today, I'm joined by Kathryn Hollar, the Director of Community Engagement and Diversity Outreach at Harvard University's School of Engineering and Applied Sciences. And Kathryn runs the REU at Harvard University.
Hi, everybody. I'm a chemical engineer by training. I've been at Harvard since 2003, so I've been running an REU program for quite a while. My program is quite large, but REU programs come in all sizes. So I'm happy to start giving you information about this great experience. I was an REU student many years ago. It had a big impact on me.
For those in the audience that may be unfamiliar with REUs, what exactly is an REU?
REU stands for Research Experience for Undergraduates. The acronym comes from the National Science Foundation. They are the biggest funder of REU experiences across the United States. A lot of their budget goes towards that. The programs are usually anywhere between 8 to 12 weeks. The most common internship time is 10 weeks. It's considered a full-time job. You work either directly with a faculty member or with a graduate student or postdoc on your own project that is part of a larger project. You get paid a stipend. You can usually live on campus with other students who are in the same program. If it's an REU program that's funded by the National Science Foundation, you usually have a cohort of anywhere between 8 to 12 students on that grant. So you will have people that are sort of in the same situation as you who are doing research over the summer. Most REU programs often have a professional development component where in addition to working full-time in the lab, you would get together once or twice a week to do some professional development, which could be going to faculty seminars, learning some skills on how to approach research or present research, and it's a really fun experience. It's like being at science summer camp, kind of. Only paid.
Yeah, that's a big part. Are these REUs always over summer, or can you do them during different semesters or quarters?
So most are over the summer because you really need at least 8 weeks to really dig in and do a project. There's some few places that have term time REUs, but those are, I think, a little bit harder to organize because, a lot of students are taking classes between, August through June.
So you mentioned a bunch of different benefits that students can get out of going to an REU, like the professional development, getting paid, that sort of thing. What are some of the other benefits that students have gotten out of doing an REU that you've seen?
So I think the REU is a great opportunity to see if a research career is for you. It's going to be very different than, say, going to class and learning things in class because there's really no answer in the back of the book. And so it's a way to see if you really like the open-ended nature of working in a research lab where, you have a pretty well-defined project, but it might change in the middle of summer because you get a result that says, oh, well, this is not going to work out, so we have to change course. And so a little bit different than working in an industry project where things are a little bit, I think, more defined in terms of, here are the milestones that you want to hit. You'll be looking at these few parameters that we might change, or you're going to be working on design. But I would say the difference between industry and academic research is that you would be working on something that's a bit more open-ended in the academic area. So that's one thing is you find out if a research career is for you. The other thing is you meet people that that will be your friends and colleagues for the rest of your life. And I still am good friends with my roommate in my REU, which was more than 20 years ago. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah, they existed way back then in the last century. So that's the other benefit. And then, you know, I think one of the great things is that, you know, being at a university in the summer and doing research, you can make all these connections that you don't have time to during the school year in terms
Right.
of really exploring what is your interest. And that's one of the great things about having a cohort of people in the REU is that, you know, your project may be interesting but not your cup of tea. But say, you know, your friend who's 2 labs over, they're working on something that's really cool, and if you know, hang out with their lab a little bit, you might learn something that is the thing that you really are passionate about. So I think it's an opportunity to make a lot of different kinds of connections over the summer that you might not have time to during the school year. The other thing that I always tell my students is that one of your objectives over the summer, aside from like exploring your career interests and getting some good skills in the lab, is that you really want to get a good letter of recommendation from your mentor.
Right.
And so like setting the stage for the next thing by working hard and asking good questions is you know, you will have someone who knows you really well by the end of the summer and your potential as a researcher. And so you really want to make sure that that is something that comes out of the summer. A lot of students, you know, some of the things that we try to emphasize in our program is getting lab techniques under your belt, whether it be, you know, cell culture or nanofabrication or some kind of computational technique that you can really talk about in your resume or your CV or in your cover letter to wherever you want to go next. Um, and the other thing is really thinking about how to frame research problems and design problems. Um, that may seem overwhelming at first, but you really want to sort of get a picture of like, you know, how do we think about answering questions? So how do we frame the experiments and plan the experiments so that we get a yes or no answer so we know where to go next? One of our faculty told me, he's like, you know, I really like that student. They don't have all the answers. They have all the questions. So part of the training is to teach you how to ask good questions. Like, how do you ask a question in a way that you can do an experiment or a simulation and get an answer that tells you what the next question should be?
Kind of along the lines of benefits again. So you mentioned that the REOs are paid through an NSF grant. What does that funding cover for each individual student?
So it depends on what part of the country you're in, because cost of living is very different between Boston and Tulsa, Oklahoma, or Baton Rouge, Louisiana, or, you know, maybe similar to Berkeley, California. So the stipends are usually somewhere between $4,000. I think the new guidelines are $6,000. And then on top of that, you're usually provided with on-campus housing.
Okay.
That's how we structure it because the cost of living here is so high. Other places where the cost of living is lower, they may say, here's your stipend of $6,000 and you can live on or off campus for this much. So we provide a stipend of around, right now, $5,000. We'll probably bump that up in the next year or so. And then on-campus housing, and then usually some sort of travel stipend of several $100s.
That's really cool. So do students usually apply for REUs at their own university, or do they usually go to some other part of the country?
But it depends on the student, because I've had students who have families, and so they prefer to stay here in Boston. They're usually we have a lot of different educational institutions here in Boston, so we usually don't recruit from Harvard for our REU because there are some internal funds here at Harvard for Harvard students. And I think that is probably the case at many other institutions. So I think you can investigate at your home institution if you want to stay there and make a good connection with a faculty member, especially institutions that are primarily undergrad institutions. They can have REU sites as well and REU funding. And so it's a really good way at your home institution to get a good relationship with a faculty member there, especially if you're a freshman just starting out. Um, and sometimes students do that here through our internal Harvard funding. But, you know, and the REU program is really great in that it's all over the United States, and there are even some international sites as well. And Mallory, I'll send you, it's very easy to search for this because NSF has a great tool on its website. And if you just Google REU NSF search, it'll take you to a place where you can put in anything by like the topic of what you want to research. You can look at like how many REU sites there are at Berkeley or Harvard, for example, or at Howard University. You can do it by state, so you can, or by international location. So you can sort of say, oh, I'd really like to spend a summer in Maine doing ecological research. Let me see if there's anything there. And you can go to the NSF website and see if they have a funded project there, which is really cool.
Yeah, okay, I'll definitely find that and then share that with everybody here so they can see that and see what process is. So I guess since we brought up the website, so how do students apply for these opportunities?
So most applications now are online. Usually the components are this sort of an online questionnaire that probably will take an hour or more to fill out. There's a sort of basic information, your email address, who you, like what you're majoring in, your GPA, your any past internships you've had, and then programs ask for either one or two essays. One, we ask for two. One is what are your research interests, and the other is more of a personal statement about your background and what got you interested in science or engineering. And I like to split it up that way just to make it clear for the students. And then the other component is you need some kind of copy of your transcript. And then one or two letters of recommendation. And depending on the program, some programs only require one, some require two, some will let you go up to three. On the subject of the transcript, I think more places are only requiring an unofficial transcript just because of the encryption that they put now with the online request for transcripts. It's really hard to bundle that into a PDF, which is what most of the kind of application software does now. So
yeah,
and also like waiting and paying for transcripts can be really annoying.
Yes, exactly.
So we don't want it to be subject to how many transcripts you can afford to get at the end of the semester when you're running out of money, right? So we've gone to just asking for unofficial transcripts.
Okay, awesome. And so do students usually apply for just one REU, or do they apply for as many as they want?
Well, there's no restriction on how many you can apply to.
Okay.
And so students will apply to, as many as they have capacity to apply for. Some people will only apply to one. I don't recommend that because that's, putting all your eggs in one basket. I would say, 5 to 10. If you have a really specific research interest and you find places that have that research, it's not too much work to tailor your essay to each place. Mm-hmm. And it's good practice for later when you're applying for jobs or graduate school. So it's it's good to in your essay to say why you're interested in that program. Like I would recommend as you're applying, look at past projects that have been funded uh, and sort of talk about those specifically. If it's a new site, see which faculty are associated with it and talk about that research. And if you're just starting out and you're really open to any kind of project, just list a couple of things that you think are interesting and tie it back to the classes you've taken. But I think sort of doing your homework about why you want to be at that particular site is important to do.
And that actually was going to be my next question is, do you have any advice on how a student could make their application stronger? I mean, you touched on that a little bit, but do you have any other advice?
Yeah, so I think, try understanding, reading their website and seeing what kind of like majors they're looking for, what kind of experience. Some programs are looking for only upper level students who have taken certain courses. Others, like ours, take students at all levels. The other thing I would say is make sure that in your application you spell out what kind of skills you have. Like if you're um, if you have taken Python and can program in Python, you should certainly include that. If you know how to program in MATLAB, if you are familiar with tissue culture or aseptic technique, or if you've worked in a nanoscale facility and are familiar with certain kinds of equipment, you should put that in. And don't just use abbreviations to spell it out. Because sometimes people will do like a trick where they'll search the PDFs that they have or the applications they have for people who have certain skills because they'll have a project that is looking for someone who has this specific skill or this specific course. And so that is really helpful if you can make sure you include that in your application.
And we actually have a question from the audience. How did the REU experience change your perspective on doing research in an academic lab?
My own, I realized it was a lot more fun than doing homework. So I was a hardworking student, so I would stay up all night, like working on my homework. But like I just found out that like the challenge of like not knowing the answer and trying to narrow down the parameters so that you could find out like what was really going on in the system was really fun. The other thing is that it kind of helped me understand how research labs were structured in terms of it's not always the faculty member who's doing, they're not doing all the work, and they're actually there to help advise their postdoctoral researchers and their graduate students so that they can eventually become people who manage groups. And so those grad students and postdocs, by mentoring undergraduates, are learning skills in terms of how to mentor and be good managers of projects. So that was sort of something I started to understand over time, that people don't like know all the answers. They're not born knowing all the answers, and I always thought that my professors knew everything, right? But they're just curious people, and the best kind of mentor is someone's like, well, I don't know, let's find out together. And that kind of sort of it demystified professors are people too.
Funny how that is. We actually have a second question from the audience. So what are things that you wish you had known when you started your REU that you know now? So I guess, what would you tell your younger self about the REU?
My younger self, that's better than. Well, so the advice that I give to my students now is that you should really not be afraid to approach your professor and talk to your professor about the science or about, like, even about your career aspirations. So that's something that I wish I had done more of when I was in REU, is to talk to my mentor, my graduate student mentor, and my faculty mentor about, you know, what it, what is it that you like about your job? How, what makes you come to work every day? Uh, this seems like a hard job. Why do you keep doing it? It's like, like what is it that it's like making you want to do this? And seeing that that's a match for you as well. Like everybody's motivation is different, but asking them what the benefits of being in academia are, doing research. What different settings can you do research in? How did you get where you are now? Like, what do you recommend that I do as my next steps if I want to follow in this kind of path?
Mm-hmm.
And professors and grad students, they love sharing not just the science but also their experience. And I didn't realize that. I was like really intimidated and thought, they're not going to want to waste their time answering my questions. But really, the reason that people become professors is not just because they like to do research. It's because they like to mentor people. If you want to do research, you can do research at a company. Uh, uh, but one thing that professors really like is to work with young students and help them find their path, and that's something I didn't realize.
That is, I think, really good advice. And I think when I was an undergrad and I first approached my first research advisor to see if I could do research in his lab, I was terrified, like so stressed out the whole time in that conversation. So I think it would have helped a lot to hear, like, they want you to be in the lab. They want you to be excited about the research. They want to talk to you about this, but it is very intimidating.
Yeah. But I mean, I've had students who have gone out for coffee and sit with the professor, and they made time to do it because they're like, oh, the student wants my opinion. They're like, wow, that's so great.
Yeah.
uh, so yeah, it's they'll make the time to do it.
Yeah, definitely. And when I was a grad student, I also very much enjoyed giving people advice. So I also identify with that side.
Yeah. Well, I think that as the grad students and postdocs, they're still finding their way, and like answering those questions for another person is also helpful to them as they think about their next steps. And that's what some things that some grad students and postdocs have shared with me, that having the student, like, what I really liked doing was talking about what they wanted to do, and then I started reflecting about, what would I like to do? Once I get my experiments to work.
Yeah, I know that. I realized that I didn't ask you specifically about your REU at Harvard. Can you tell us a little bit about your specific REU?
So my REU is funded by about 10 different sources or more. So we have an REU site in biomaterials, but we also have several NSF-funded centers, one in quantum materials, another in math and bio. We have a South Materials Research Center. Um, we also have faculty who have their single investigator grants, so it's just them, uh, or them and a few of their friends, colleagues, and so they don't have a big REU component, but they ask the NSF for what that's called an REU supplement. And so they'll fund like 2 or 3 students. So all of these students kind of together, we have about 65 or 70 students in our program, which is quite large compared to most other programs. But we have a lot of different kinds of projects. So we have about 20, 25 labs that host students. We have anything from computer scientists looking at data privacy, to people working in the clean room, to people doing experiments on plants. So, so it's it's great. We have a batch of like about 60 or 70 awesome students every summer. I will say also that one of the things in our program that might be a little different is that we also have some Harvard institutes that are not funded by the National Science Foundation that also host students as part of these joint programs. And one of the usual restrictions when you're applying to an REU if it's funded by the National Science Foundation is that you must be a U.S. citizen or a permanent resident. However, this Harvard money allows us in some of the projects to have students who are like on an F1 visa. So if there are any international students in the audience, I know it can be really daunting to try to find a position in the summer because of that restriction. But if you look closely or contact different faculty, sometimes they can find pots of money where you can be funded.
Yeah, that's really good advice. That's really cool to hear. We have a couple other questions from the audience now, so and I'm kind of wrapping up with my own personal questions, so we'll just, at this point, I guess, switch to questions from the audience, if that's okay with you?
Okay, sure.
All right, so do you remember challenges that seemed hard to address during your REU experience and what you learned from them?
Let's see.
Thinking back.
Thinking way back. Well, I think that, well, actually, I messed up an experiment once. Well, more than once, but that happens. I was working on these root reactors, like these plant root reactors, and you have to flow the media down over the roots, and so you use a pump to do that, and I turned one of the pumps in the wrong direction, and so like the roots dried out overnight between like when I checked it, when I left, and I was like, oh, I've ruined this experiment, and I felt so terrible. I was like, oh, they're gonna fire me, and like, you know, they're gonna write me a terrible letter, and I was like, oh, I didn't want to show up, you know, and tell my mentor, and so my graduate student was so nice, and he was like, you know, let's just keep on with the experiment, you know, we'll just put a asterisk on that, you know, one reactor. We've got 3 more that, you know, we'll be okay with, and let's just finish the experiment. And the funny thing is that we got this really interesting result that, you know, we turned the pump back on, and things, it's, you know, we progressed, and that reactor of roots like produced more of these secondary metabolites than the other ones, which is an interesting finding. And so it sort of started this whole new direction of like, if we stress them, like for some small amount of time, can we get a better result? And so the lesson that I learned is that even sometimes mistakes can be really positive. And so the thing is, you take good notes, you make good observations. Sometimes you screw up, but if you're really thinking, it can turn into something that is even better than what you had without the mistake. So I think the sort of thing that I learned that summer was like, it's okay to make mistakes, and you can often learn a lot from making mistakes. And so that's one thing that I don't know if that answered the question or not, but
oh, I think so, and I think that was a great story.
I was really afraid of making mistakes, and I don't think that you should let that keep you from taking risks, because research is about taking those kinds of like intellectual risks and saying, oh, if we try this, what new line of research will come out of it? I mean, I don't mean safety risks, but but intellectual risks. So don't be afraid to ask a question that may seem like not so smart on the surface, but once you think deeply about it and have discussions, it could lead to something that leads to more insight. So don't be afraid to ask those questions.
That's good advice. So do you collect feedback from past RU students, and what sort of feedback stands out to you from past students?
Well, I think the feedback that we collect shows that the mentor mentee relationship is the most important one during the whole summer because that's who you're spending most of the time with. And so we actually do some training before the summer happens with our mentors and try to get them together and get them ready for the summer. Um, uh, Students, it's great. One thing that I find that's important in our program is to have some activities that are professional development, but that also bring the students together. Um, so I think that's an important key is like that your sort of colleagues in your cohort are going to be your support system during the summer. Uh, and um, and so we try to make sure that we have activities that bring people together at least once or twice a week, especially at the beginning. We actually have a lot of students who are from community colleges. I try to recruit sort of non-traditional students like veterans. I've had students with families in the program before. And I think across the board, um, a lot of students will come here thinking, what did I get myself into? This is going to be so hard. I don't know any physics and I'm going to fail. Uh, but after that, like first 2 weeks of feeling like you're the worst REU student ever, um, uh, you realize that you're in the same boat as everybody else and you're learning. Your mentor knows that you're learning and that good communication between you and your mentor is really important in terms of setting your goals for the summer, both in terms of the project, but also in terms of what you want to learn and what you want to improve about yourself. Uh, and you shouldn't try to bite off more than you can chew. It's only 10 weeks.
Yeah.
So I think that the thing that I learned from the students that the most is that good communication with your mentor is one of the most important things that can happen during the summer, especially at the beginning.
That is really good to know. So, just looking. Do you think there's an optimal year that you should be doing an REU? Like, is freshman too early? Is senior too late?
I say that you should try to start doing research as soon as your freshman year. And I say that because, you have basically 3 summers if you're in a 4-year program. I mean, a lot of engineering programs are now 5 years, so then you would have more, and so you would have co-ops. But do an REU, work in industry, see what is the best fit for you. So start early. See if you can get something for right after your freshman year. But junior year is not too late either. If you're thinking of going to grad school and you're starting research in your junior year, um, some people like to see an application, faculty like to see at least 2 summer research, but if you can find someone during the school year at your home institution to do like an honors thesis with, that's also a good experience. But it's never too early or too late to start.
What are 3 words that you think sum up the REU experience?
Oh, wow, that's a good one. I would say challenging, fun, and I don't want to put too much of it, but for a lot of students, it's life-changing. It can be like the thing that sets the direction for what they want to do, or maybe career setting.
Is there anything that you'd like to say to kind of wrap everything up?
Well, I always give this advice to people. It's like, because some people are like, well, I don't feel like I'll get into this program because it's too competitive. And I always tell them, well, you definitely won't get in if you don't apply. So
Yeah.
take the time to, most application deadlines are like between February and March. February 1st is, some people have January 15th deadlines. Ours is February 15th. But I would say that start now at the end of the semester, sort of getting your letter of recommendations lined up. So, identify a few programs that you want to apply to. Ask your faculty, say, I'm going to be applying for some REU programs, and I would like to let a recommendation from you, and ask if they'll write a good one for you, a good letter for you. Start that process now before the semester's over, and then follow up and say, here are the programs that I'm applying to, and here's how you get the request. Most of the requests are online now. The secret is that once a faculty member has written your letter, they pretty much just change who they're sending it to, unless they know someone at that institution that's associated, and then they might personalize a little bit more. But, ask faculty, say, I really like this part of the class that we covered, and I'd like to do research in this area. Can you point to some institutions that have strengths there? So I think, ask your trusted faculty members at your home institutions where are good places to apply, especially if you're sort of thinking that you want to go to graduate school. One way to really get noticed is to do an REU at that institution.
Yeah.
So sort of thinking about where you want to be for grad school, if that's something you want to do.
And I just thought of one more question before we wrap up, I guess. If you have done one REU, can you still apply for more REUs, maybe at different institutions? I guess there's no, database that says you've already done some.
Right. No, yeah, absolutely. You can totally, and, for some places, having that prior REU experience really makes you more competitive, especially for, higher level projects. So if there's somebody who's looking for someone who can hit the ground running because they have this particular project that they want to publish a paper on, then that makes you more competitive for that particular project. So yes, I think that, if there's serial REU students that, don't let one, and, you may have a bad experience in an REU program. That is totally a possibility. And don't let that discourage you. It could just be bad timing for the grad student. It could be sort of a mismatch in mentor-mentee styles. It could be that you weren't interested you found out you weren't interested, or you're a terrible experimentalist, but maybe you like theory better. So, I would say if you really think that the sort of open-ended project, open-ended questions are something that you really like, then keep plugging at it. And don't let any other people discourage you either. Lisa Wall, who probably nobody knows anymore, was a famous comedian, and people told her she wasn't funny, but then she became very famous, and she's very funny. So don't, if you really love it, keep plugging at it.
Well, that advice is really uplifting, and I felt motivated from that. So I think that's a really great point to end, actually. Well, thank you so much for coming and talking to us about REUs. I think that the students are going to get a lot out of this and will take your advice, hopefully, and apply for these REUs as soon as possible. And I am looking forward to seeing what they do with them. So
great. Thanks, Mallory. And
thank you. Thanks. Bye.
Bye.